Now we've got longtime Republican Latino political consultant Mike Madrid. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time.
Sure, it's great to be with you.
So I want to talk about Latinos in particular. Obviously, one major segment in terms of this past election cycle that swung to the right was the Latino population. It's a major cause of concern among Democrats. Can you talk about where we stand right now, though, as Donald Trump continues to shed support from groups across the country related to his handling of the economy, where Latinos stand?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, this has been for the past decade one of the fastest growing group of Republican voters. But for the moment, Brian, we're seeing Latinos, like all voters broadly, collapsing in support. And I'm not overstating that word. Collapse is a big word, but it is an accurate reflection. You're seeing a whole host of polls coming out after the first 100 days, suggesting that most of the gains, in fact, some of the polls are showing all of the gains that Trump has made since he came onto the national scene with Latino voters has basically disappeared. Now, there are some polls that do show him with some smaller drops, but all of them are considerable. All of them are measurable. Almost all of this is related to the economy. There are, of course, deep concerns about the immigration raids, the mass deportations, but by and large, this is proving to be an economic voter that is very, very concerned about where Trump is leading the country, and they're not having any of it.
So, is there anything to distinguish how Latino voters vote from, I guess, native born Americans or Caucasian voters? I mean, we've seen this past election cycle has shown us, if nothing else, that the economy is the principal driver. Even amid everything else that's going on, folks will vote based on the economy. I think in the past, we've relied on this idea that, okay, other ethnic groups will vote based on maybe social issues that are more closely aligned with their ethnicity. But is that gone now? Is there basically no daylight between how Latino voters vote and how white voters vote, for example?
Brian, that's a great encapsulation of where America is at this moment, and as the coalitions in both parties change and transform. Latino voters are moving away from being a racial and ethnic voting group, primarily, driven and prioritizing racial and ethnic issues like immigration, and moving towards an economic pocketbook, in many ways, a populist voting bloc. Now, there are still first generation groups, of course, that are immigrants themselves or the recently migrated, maybe the sons and daughters that are still much more compelled by racial and ethnic anchored issues. But the fastest growing segment of the Latino electorate is this third and now a fourth generation Latino voter. And even though they identify ethnically as Latino, they are overwhelmingly an economic voter voting on pocketbook issues. So, in many ways, it is a little bit of a mix between the two. You've encapsulated it perfectly. This community is very much in transition, and that largely accounts for why this rightward shift has been happening for the better part of a decade, and most pronounced really since COVID. That's when things really started to change dramatically for this group.
So I'm especially curious about this idea of mass deportations, specifically the illegal deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, that obviously polls horribly for Trump in the United States. He's at net negative 21 points on that issue in particular. He's also at net negative 4 points on immigration more broadly. Does that issue have any impact on the Latino community? Or again, are we just deferring back to the previous thesis, which is that there's really no daylight between how Latinos respond to issues of immigration versus how white people respond to issues of immigration?
It certainly does impact the Latino community more so than other groups. But again, I want your viewers to really understand that what we're witnessing is these generational breaks have an extraordinary amount of difference in the way that this voter perceives themselves as largely American or largely of an ethnic identity prioritized before that Americanness, before that American identity. And while that has traditionally been this breaking point, Democrats more often than not are speaking to that first gen immigrant Spanish dominant group. Republicans have kind of dismissed that and kind of basically said, just become American, which doesn't really mean anything. And basically leave your ethnicity at the shore, leave it at the border. If you're going to come here, forget all of that and become quote unquote American. The truth is somewhere in between. It is both. And what we were seeing heading into the November elections were these really kind of jaw-dropping numbers where a majority of Latinos were saying we need to mass deport the undocumented, or we need much stronger border security controls. And then now that it's actually happening, those support levels are collapsing. They're crashing as the as the abstract becomes more real in people's lives. But that's also not terribly unlike most other voters also. The border is under control now. It was when Biden left office. And that the concern amongst Latinos and Americans broadly about this the caravans coming across the border or terrorists streaming across the border, that's almost entirely been mitigated. What has replaced it is these economic concerns, which Latino voters, like all voters, place almost entirely on Donald Trump's
Right.
doorstep because he's taken quote unquote credit for it and blame for it. And overwhelmingly, these voters are rejecting it.
All right, so Mike, among white voters, we've seen that there is such a high degree of polarization that really there are very few swing voters, left or right, left in this country. That really just in a few states, a small sliver of people are the ones deciding these elections. But otherwise, our political affiliation has largely become part of our identity. And once you become a Democrat or become a Republican, it's hard to shed that. Are Latino voters the same way? Are their political affiliations as hardened as white voters? And I ask that because the broader question here is we saw a big swing from these among Latino voters from left to right. But I guess my question as an activist from the perspective of persuasion is, are those people still gettable?
So you've got a lot to unpack there. Great questions. Let me answer really succinctly for everybody. Absolutely gettable. Yes, always have been, very much on the table. All this polling is showing a regression or return of Latino voters away from the Republican Party back to the Democrats. If these polls are to be believed, and there's no reason not to, back to Barack Obama levels of support. Okay, so huge transition back. The question becomes now, is it a true swing voter like you're talking about? And why are Latinos not as hyper polarized as white voters? And the answer is twofold. The first is this is a much younger voter with much less vote history and relationship with both political parties. Brian, there's very very little data suggesting that Latinos are becoming more Republican or more conservative. There never has been. But there's overwhelming evidence that Latinos are becoming more populist with weaker party ties, with weaker party affiliations and loyalties. So when they feel that the economy is not doing well under a Joe Biden coming out of COVID, they're going to punish that politician at the polls. That doesn't mean that they're in love with or like Donald Trump. It means that they're sending a message to the party in power. And now that Donald Trump has taken over the reins of power in DC and control of the economy and is running it into a ditch, they're responding equally negatively and saying, no, we're not going to vote for that. No, we don't support that. And what it really comes down to is that as Latinos are emerging as the fastest growing group of working class voters, they are the moderates in both parties. They are motivated almost entirely by economic concerns. They're not animated by the trans issues or the reproductive rights issues or the cultural issues that tend to dominate an older, more affluent electorate, which has kind of been very hyper red or hyper blue. Right in the middle is this emergent group of blue collar workers that are voting overwhelmingly on the state of the economy, and they're not confident that either party has control or that either party has a policy solution set that works for them.
Mike, more broadly, do you think that Democrats are going to be effective at dismantling the branding that Republicans have enjoyed for so long as these responsible stewards of the economy? Look, you are a longtime Republican political operative, right? You've worked in Republican politics for a long time. You have seen the ways in which that party has benefited from this branding that the GOP is the party of fiscal responsibility. Now, my pushback to that, obviously, is that, Bill Clinton cleaned up a recession from George H.W. Bush, that Barack Obama cleaned up a recession from George W. Bush, that Joe Biden cleaned up a recession from Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, too, has launched us once again into a recession. When you look at, job gains since 1989, Democrats have gained 50 million jobs to Republicans less than 2 million jobs. So there are arguments against this idea, but that doesn't still mean that Republicans don't benefit from this branding. As far as the broader population goes, though, do you think that we're in a moment where finally this branding is being relinquished by the GOP, or does it feel like that branding will subsist regardless of the actual events that impact it?
Again, really smart questions and great observations, a large part of which I agree with. Let me suggest this. Having worked at the highest levels of political campaigns in this country on both sides of the aisle, I have seen and will tell you very directly that Republicans approach campaigns very differently than Democrats. You pointed out some really compelling statistics, evidence, and history, none of which is really refutable. But voters aren't looking for who's right. They're looking for who is setting the frame of the discussion and winning on that battlefield.
Right.
And that's what Republicans do extremely well. They do it extremely well. And whether or not the rhetoric matches the reality, as long as the Republicans continue to double down on their narratives, they are where the public wants them to be. It doesn't mean that, and look, there's also no question that the average American voter, and I would argue a good swath of Republicans right now, is losing confidence in the Republican Party. A lot of this stuff is actually becoming unwound. Some of this mythology that
Yeah.
you're talking about is beginning to unravel. You have, for goodness sakes, a Republican president advocating for the largest tax increase in modern American history. You have an American president who is protectionist, anti-free trade. You have a Republican president who is diametrically opposed to literally everything Republicans have stood for 30 years. At some point, there's going to be a give. So your question, the answer to your question is this. It depends on what Democrats do. My great fear is that the Democrats are going to do very well in the midterms. I want them to do very well in the midterms, but they will do well without learning the lessons of the last 4 years on retrenching, re-engaging, and reconnecting with their working class, blue collar roots. The Democratic Party is not the party of Franklin Delano Roosevelt anymore. They've got to get back to that if they're going to engage the fastest growing groups like Latinos, like younger people. And right now, Donald Trump has given this gift to the Democratic Party when all he had to do was go golfing and
Right.
left the Biden economy alone. His approval ratings would probably be in the high 50s right now. This is a complete self-own, a complete self-implosion, and Democrats should not return the favor by simply thinking that by winning and beating a guy who's stepping on his own toes is the best way to build a party going forward. You can do both. You should do both. And Democrats, please do both, because otherwise, this dangerous element in our society that is attacking the republic will continue. And the only way to stop it is to have a healthy political party that speaks to an aspirational working class. That's got to be the Democrats. And that's what the opportunity is before them.
Perfectly put. Mike, how can my viewers see more from you?
You can follow me on Substack, is where I write on these topics very regularly. I'll be digging more into the polling. The newsletter I write is called The Great Transformation. You can also follow me on pretty much on social media. But if you want to dig deeper into the Latino dynamic, I just had a book come out called The Latino Century, and I explore all these thematics in great detail on The Great Transformation on Substack.
Excellent. Well, I'll put the link to your Substack right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mike Madrid, thanks so much for your time.
Brian, thanks. Been a big fan of yours, and it's a pleasure to be with you.